everyone. I would like to thank a lot Sergio and Leonardo for the organization of this event. I'm working at Carnegie Mellon University doing the PhD at the Department of Engineering and Public Policy. I'm working with two centers over there, the Climate Decision Making Center, which mainly works on issues related with both the climate science, climate assessments, and trying to look at what types of technologies can help solving the climate problem. I'm also working with the Carnegie Mellon Electricity Industry Center. This center works more heavily on trying to understand the future of the electricity system in the US, traditionally looking mostly at the new capacity infrastructure related problems. So overall, Sergio asked me also for a very short bio. Besides working right now at Carnegie Mellon, I've been working very closely with Resources for the Future in Washington, D.C. For the past 2 summers, and also in an undergoing collaboration over the year, tackling this problem of assessing the energy efficiency potential for the U.S. I've been also working with the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. In that one, in a slightly different project, also part of my dissertation. My dissertation so far has 3 components. This is one of them. This is the latest part of the dissertation. The 2 others are assessing the potential for solid-state lighting in general illumination systems. And another one, which I'll be briefly mentioning in part of this introduction, is look at the US and the EU residential electricity consumption and econometrically try to assess differences due to electricity prices, families' income, and climate. So after this kind of extensive bio, let's look at the question in hand today, the U.S. energy savings. So I'll be moving to slide 2 now. So first of all, how does the context affect the energy policies, and how do the energy policies affect the underlying baseline states over time? So what you're seeing in this figure is over the year how the refrigerator size evolved over time, at the same time the energy used per unit, and the refrigerator price in 1983 dollars. So what you can see from this figure is that after the 70s, the refrigerators grew bigger, they were less energy intensive, and at the same time their prices dropped. And this was mainly due to the implementation of standards during the 70s for refrigerators. It will be nice to think that every efficiency story will be as the success, but definitely the type of context and policies in place will have an implication on how things evolve over time. Well, let's look at today's context then. Today's context is characterized by high energy prices, and you can see on the right 2 figures that hopefully show up in your screen. Sergio, let me know if some figures do not show up. So yes, you see that. Great. So you can see that as it's known to everyone, the oil prices increased over time until very recently decreasing. Similarly, since the 1990s, the U.S. residential electricity price also kind of rose steadily, although not a very sharp increase, from 8 cents per kilowatt hour to close to 11 cents today, which is kind of smaller than most of the EU residential retail prices, as we're going to see in a couple of slides. At the same time, the US is facing capacity constraints with the need of additional capacity to be built very soon. And finally, we're moving very fast towards a carbon-constrained world. Again, it is not news for most of the folks around here that the US today accounts for 22% of greenhouse gases emissions in the world, and this is a share that has pertained to the US for the past years. So we have a context that opens grounds for energy efficiency. However, one needs to address another important issue is that when we're looking at the energy efficiency potential, we need to take into account what is the baseline energy consumption and greenhouse gases emissions today, and how does that compare to other countries too. The US and EU start from very different baselines, so when we're trying to even compare the two regions, we need to take that into account. There are a couple of national policies that are important to mention for the EU folks listening to this talk. So very recently, the Energy Independence and Security Act came into place. And what I would like to show you in this figure is the impact of the energy independence of primary energy demand over time. The first line here on the top were the projections of primary energy demand prior to the implementation of this act. And the second line over here are the projections of the primary energy demand after the act was implemented. So this act alone has represented, through the deployment of different types of things, not only energy efficiency, but also CAFE standards and other, a decrease in 5% reduce the primary energy demand in such a way that by 2030 it will be similar to 2015 primary energy consumption. And you can see that a variety of things can be used, like improvements in lighting, in envelope shells, and other types of things for buildings, industry, and transportation. The key issue that this plot doesn't address is how much this will cost to deploy all those types of technologies. Anyways, I just wanted to make the point in this slide that one policy alone can have already some impact on what are the baselines that we'll see in the future for energy demand. So moving on, there are different types of energy efficiency rules, regulations, policies, and financial incentives that are undergoing right now in the US at different levels, so both at federal, state, and local levels. This figure shows, for those of you who are interested, taken directly from the website Desire, what are the types of things that are underway in different states. And so the color coding represents if those are either at federal, state, or utility level, and the number inside each of those dots represents the number of policies in each state of that different type. So you can see that for rules, regulations, and policies, you have different types of things, and for the financial incentives, also an extensive list. And so for those of you that are interested in learning a little bit more about in detail what is going on in each state, you can dig into this. Again, looking at the baseline issue still, we're going to now see how the US compare with other nations before tackling the amount of the potential. To see that, we might start by seeing how the US is using its resources for wealth creation. So this plot is very interesting in showing the amount of wealth creation per kilogram of CO2 emitted. So this would be the kind of metric where the US would like to be upfront. So for each kilogram of CO2 emitted, being able to generate more wealth. However, when we look at the world's 20 largest economies, we can see that the US is actually lagging behind many other countries as Brazil, France, Italy, and many others. Well, one could think that this will be an issue of the population. So, but when we look at the amount of tons of CO2 emitted per capita, in that case, we can see that the CO2 is coming up front. So just a short break here. Sergio, I'm seeing some people saying that no presentation is showing. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, from my side I can see it, and Hans is here in the office with me. He can see it as well, so...
Brian and Daniel are... Oh, Daniel can see the presentation.
Okay, I'll try to address the issue with Brian, and please proceed.
Okay, I'll keep moving. It is also important to see this in terms of how those carbon intensities are different across regions. So this plot shows over time the amount of CO2 emissions per thousand US dollars. And you can see at the bottom coming Central and South America. We have the world average over here coming a little bit between the two. And the two things to point over here are, first, the steady decrease of North America while still above the world average, the sharp decrease of Eurasia in very recent years, and the unusual pattern from the Middle East that against all odds is having a stabilized or increased carbon intensity. So far we have looked only at energy consumption. In this plot I'm showing you the residential electricity consumption per capita as function of the residential electricity price. With the width of the bubbles represented the GDP per capita in $2,000. Some key points to take out from this figure are that for regions that have the same ranges of electricity prices still, you can see that some countries manage to have fairly lower residential electricity consumption per capita than in the case of the US. But we have others like the Scandinavian countries that actually consume more for even further lower electricity prices. The same disparity in residential electricity consumption per capita is not only something that shows up when we do Europe versus EU comparisons. Even if we look just between the US states, we can see a very wide variety of electricity prices in different states and also electricity consumption. So you can see that the electricity prices, this is just residential rates in the US, range from close to 6 cents per kilowatt hour to almost 20 cents per kilowatt hour, and a whole array and disparity of electricity consumption per capita. Part of the work that I'm not going to present here today, but that I'll be happy to address questions about, is what is the econometric importance of different types of factors, electricity price, income, and climate, in explaining those varieties across regions at both state level and also in comparisons across regions, US and EU in this case, and amongst EU countries. So how can we go about and measure the energy efficiency potential, and what are the types of things that we should account for? Well, first of all, how are we going to define what is energy efficiency and how to account for that? So the National Action Plan for Energy Efficiency refers to energy efficiency and conservation as to use less energy to provide just the same level or an improved level of service to the energy consumer. I added to this definition also that this should be in an economically efficient way, and that will depend obviously on how we define what is the economically efficient way and to whom. One way to represent the energy efficiency potential is to represent this through energy efficiency or conservation supply curves. This is a type of display that has long been in the literature. The main idea came from Rosenfeld and Meyer in 1983. And the key thing is that the energy efficiency supply curves provide a very easy way to compare the energy efficiency potential with investments on the electricity generation side. So this is how an energy efficiency supply looks like. On the x-axis, you have the amount of energy saved or pollutant saved, or percentage of energy saved or pollutant saved, while on the y-axis you have the cost per unit of energy saved or pollutant provided. This normally provided in levelized annual cost per annual energy or pollutant savings. So each step along those curves corresponds to a specific energy efficiency measure. They are specific enough to be for 1 year, a specific region of analysis. They have underlying fuel prices, namely electricity prices if we're just concerned with electricity options, an underlying discount rate, and generally this should be stated for a specific consumer class, although this is not generally stated in the literature. For the case of the residential sector, if we're wondering on how to compare different types of end uses like cooking, cooling, clothes washers, etc., we need a very good characterization of the baseline technologies that are today or in the future in the market, and what are the substitute technologies that are going to be able to provide the same level of service, and what are the costs for all those things, both the investment costs and the cost to running those devices. So some of you might be familiar with the recent work from McKinsey, where they deployed these types of curves not only for energy efficiency, but also for other types of investments in renewables and other types of investment opportunities. The US curve stated that for the residential sector, and by 2030, 500 million metric tons of carbon dioxide could be saved. And this is interesting to then compare with our results further along the road. So as you can see from this figure, and this is something that I'll try to show also in my results in a couple of slides, you can clearly put some efficiency options, like over here you have commercial buildings LED lighting with some sort of supply side options, and let me try to find some over here, like some distributed solar PV or other types of things. So my aim was to try to build conservation supply curves at census division level annually between 2008 and up to 2030 for the residential sector alone. I thought it was important to account for the cost for different actors. And what I mean by different actors is to try to simulate what would happen if consumers were the one bearing all the costs of those new technologies, or what would happen if utilities were the ones that will need to be responsible for implementing these projects and be somehow paid for it, or some energy service companies. This accounts also for not only electricity, but a range of different types of fuels, and also including different types of ranges of fuel prices. I thought also that it was important to take into account different types of cost-effectiveness criteria. What do I mean by this? It is different to find the optimal path to reduce primary energy consumption, or to reduce electricity consumption, or to reduce the carbon emissions. That will lead to different types of paths on technology options. And I thought it was important to incorporate those differences and see where climate and energy policies might not align. So on the left, you just have a visual representation of the several dimensions of this problem that go along different years of analysis. Over here, ranges of electricity prices and other factors, and for different census division levels. And for those of you that are not familiar with the census division levels, I'll show also that in a couple of slides. So the first thing is to try to understand how residential energy consumption is consumed actually. So the primary energy consumption for the residential sector is close to 22 quadrillion BTUs, and the final energy consumption 11 quadrillion BTUs. Where the main difference between the primary and the final are obviously electricity conversion losses. Over here in the plot, you can see the major end uses for the residential sector, and on the y-axis you have the amount of energy that is spent in each of those. The color coding represents different types of fuels that might be used. Some key points to take out of this graph are the following. If we look at electricity alone, we're leaving still a lot of energy use out of this, mainly in heating and hot water, which are those red bars that we see over here. The other key point is the importance of taking into account energy conversion losses. And what I mean by energy conversion losses from electricity, it is not distribution losses, no, distribution and transmission losses. It is the losses in conversion, and that's why these bars are so big. We can represent this also in terms of CO2 emissions. So over here you have exactly the same color coding and the same end uses, but now our I-axis is million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And it is important to mention this part of incorporating other types of fuels in this assessment too, since our preliminary analysis was only taking into account electricity. And for the residential sector alone, we can see that natural gas effectively accounts with a substantial amount for heating and hot water, and thus becomes quite important to incorporate in those efficiency assessments. So what are the types of issues that we're addressing? Well, we're addressing how much energy efficiency potential can be achieved for each U.S. Census Division level between 2008 and 2030 for different types of fuels and end uses. Pay for energy efficiency investments, and which agents, consumers, utilities, energy service companies, or regulatory agencies will enjoy economic benefits or costs. We're also interested in understanding what are the regional differences in energy efficiency potential. And furthermore, what should be the targeted end uses? So instead of just deploying a lot of energy efficiency incentives and measures all over the place, what things should come first and for whom? We're also interested in understanding how different decision criteria for cost effectiveness are going to change the optimal decision path, and what are the implications on the way we think about energy and climate policies. Also, we're interested in knowing how much money would consumers save if energy efficiency standards were implemented. So this is reiterating a little bit the questions that you saw on all the introduction slides so far. So for the folks outside of the US, this regional residential energy efficiency model is made at census division level. The different census division level are those that are over here: Pacific Mountain, East, North, Central, etc. So overall we have 9 census division level in the model characterization. And this is how the model looks like to the user. So the user sees this window where it can select a variety of things. It can select the year of analysis, the region of analysis at census division level, different types of fuels to be included or not in the analysis. Then we differentiate between consumers, utility, and regulatory agencies' discount rates. And this was important because the different agents perform decisions in different ways, using different types of discount rates when they make these types of investment decisions. Furthermore, you can see a small button which is default discount rates for consumers. And this is because of the following. It is known from the efficiency literature that consumers deploy much higher discount rates than market discount rates when facing decisions toward energy efficiency appliances. Those ranges might range from 20% to 300%, as opposed to a market discount rate which might be between 5 and 12% or 20% at most. So we thought it was important to try to represent somehow, also to reproduce what will be the consumer's behavior if those opportunities are over there, and compare that with the market discount rates. Basically, this provides us a measure of all those $1 bills that might be on the floor to catch up with efficiency measures that are not caught up, and why. We also include regional carbon factors for electricity generation. Those are the values that are projected from the annual energy outlook for the United States for the 2008 case. However, since our years of analysis go out to 2030, it might be as well that the AEO values might be wrong or too far away from what is going to happen. So we provided also the option, if the user believes that the user select its own carbon factor and see how change provide both the assumptions under the annual energy outlook of 2008, but we also allow the user to specify its own fuel prices. The last part here on the right concerns different types of end users. So the program or model can be in such a way that you can just evaluate one end use at a time. So compare, for example, across the 9 census division level, which type of heating efficiency options are cheaper than others and how much can be saved. Or you can compare across different types of end uses. So should I invest in heating or cooking? At the same time, we counted for efficiency supply curves for the different types of perspectives, consumer utility is used to build those curves. But also another thing, for those of you that have seen supply curves in the literature, you might be intrigued on why sometimes the costs are negative costs or not. So sometimes the costs come below the zero line. And that mainly depends on whether the energy savings and the reduction in energy bills due to those savings are also incorporated in the dollars per ton of CO2 or dollars per kilowatt hour measures or not. The model also accounts for different types of cost effectiveness criteria, as I was telling you, so it can choose the optimal path either to reduce primary energy consumption or dollars per ton of CO2 or dollars per kilowatt hour, and in that case, only electricity-related options are used as opposed to all these fuels in the list. It also allows for another situation, which is if we should consider or not fuel switch amongst the options. This is particularly important in the case of heating. So allowing for fuel switch will make, for example, the inclusion of measures that switch from electricity-related heating to natural gas-related heating. And since some regions have more availability than others to natural gas heating systems, we also made the option of keeping the same fuel and restrict, so this provides one more constraint to our curves. So some of the preliminary results, let's look first only at the energy savings in quadrillion BTUs. So this doesn't include the costs in the figures, and each of the bars will represent different things that I'll explain now. So over here in the y-axis you have the different types of end uses, and on the y-axis you have the energy consumption. The dark bar represents the business as usual, so no efficiency measures. The following one represents what will be the energy consumption with efficiency, but without allowing for fuel switch. So if you have an electric radiator, you'll continue with some electric device. And accounting only for new purchases. So if you look at 2009, for example, or in this case 2008, only the new purchases of equipment and appliances in 2008 could be changed to more efficient ones. And as you can see, this provides only a very small incremental reduction in energy consumption. Now, the next case is annual energy consumption with efficiency, but now allowing for fuel switch. And so mainly you can see that when you start allowing the switch from electricity to natural gas or other fuels, you'll have an incrementally higher savings. So you provide more flexibility to the system. Following this, you have the annual energy consumption with efficiency without allowing for fuel switch, but you'll assume that you'll have overnight stock replacement of the full stock in the nation. And what is amazing to see over here is that even if you change the old stock in the nation overnight, your savings will be very, very small if you don't allow for fuel switch. Finally, you have what will be the amount of the savings if you allow for both fuel switch and you have an overnight stock replacement. And then you can see a dramatic decrease from 1 quadrillion BTU to below 1 quadrillion BTU. How much will this cost? Well, This plot shows just the investment costs. So those are not levelized annual costs. Those is just like upfront costs to invest in those technologies. So let's assume, for example, the following scenario now, utilities all around the world, all around the country will want to invest in energy efficiency at those different types of levels. How much will they need to spend today? And again, you have the different types of situations. If you allow only for new purchases and switch, or allowing for fuel switch and doing this the full stock. So you can see that allowing for fuel switching, the full stock of replacements will go above the $400 billion just for heating systems and for cooling systems, which will be overly expensive. Those are investment costs, but now let's look a little bit at the supply curves. So in this case, we're optimizing this for the amount of electricity consumed. So the options are ranked savings. What I would like to point out from this figure is what happens if you take exactly this same optimal order for for electricity savings, and you plot this in terms of the same ranking order, but in dollars per ton of CO2 avoided. And what you can see over here is that you're not following the optimal path for CO2 savings in many cases. So in some of these options that you're mitigating in the most cost-effective way electricity, you are not choosing the most cost-effective way to reduce carbon. So it's very important to start to have those two comparisons when you start thinking about what are the best policies to implement and for what. So those particular plots are simulations, again, for 2008, just taking into account heating, cooling, and hot water, and assuming a discount rate of 7%. Let's look at the national curve now. So I'm sorry for the labels being so crowded, but this corresponds to very small measures for each end use in terms of either cooling, hot water, or some others. So this particular simulation is for 2008. It is in the consumer perspective, so that the reduction in energy bills or in fuel costs is incorporated in the cost in dollars per ton of CO2, and this is why you see some negative values over here. This incorporates all end users in the residential sector. You can see a wide array of prices in terms of dollars per ton of CO2 that go from minus 1,000 to 500. Of course, those values are very unrealistic in light of a carbon price in today's terms. However, you can see also that even for a 40% emissions reduction potential, you'll go very close to $100 per ton of CO2, not more than that. Those are still preliminary results, but I'll be happy to discuss this with the interested folks in more detail too. Anyways, you can see that if you want to achieve a 10% reduction in residential energy consumption, most of the efficiency measures that you are going to be incorporated are related with cooling. If we want a 20% emissions reductions after cooling, we'll go through some other types of devices, which I think are heating. I cannot clearly read from here myself. And then for 40% reductions, again, some heating and cooling devices, we have some freezers too. And over here on the high end of the spectrum, we have more efficient dishwashers and other efficiency measures. So how does this compare in terms of costs with the generation side? So this plot over here shows what is the cost of electricity generation for different types of generators in the US. Let's not look that much of the CO2 emission rate and just focus a little bit on the y-axis in dollars per megawatt hour. And you can see the ranges of current coal power plants can go from 40 cents to 70 cents per kilowatt hour. Then you have the new coal plants, slightly more expensive. The natural gas and other plants with CCS on the most high range, And you can see the nuclear power plants on the high end with 12 cents per kilowatt hour. I also included PV on the figure, but PV is kind of out of the scope with the $600 per megawatt hour right now. So what is interesting? The interesting part generation prices, which is the case of the nuclear, and try to project that on the efficiency curve. For the same price in dollars per kilowatt hour, we could be saving close to 300 terawatt hours. Similarly, if we look at the low range of the electricity generation price, for that price, we could be saving close to the same amount. This will represent reducing the residential electricity demand in 20% for the same ranges of costs. So policies will need to start thinking if this is something worth pursuing or not. I may state at this point that those results are going to be very sensitive, however, to the types of measures that we include in the discount rates. So one important thing to bear in mind when we're starting to build those efficiency supply curves is that definitively they are not unique. They are going to be highly dependent on which scenarios we include, which type of end users, what is the detail of the data. And so very different folks might have very different results for energy efficiency supply curves. So I'm getting to a closing here. So the key broad messages that I wanted to show at this point is that this model that we're just starting to grasp now and that I aim to explore even further for my dissertation has the potential to address many energy efficiency and carbon policy related questions. And that definitively when we start looking and stating numbers as the McKinsey study did on what is the energy efficiency potential and how much it will cost, one needs to be clear on what we're stimulating or trying to show here, if the costs are for the consumer, if the costs are for one particular region, and what types of technologies and end users are included or not. I must also state that for this model, most of the data came from the Department of Energy. They are the underlying data for the annual energy outlook of 2008. At least 2 deliverables are coming out right now from this model. First paper, which is a working paper looking at these preliminary results on how to use regional residential efficiency supply curves for this model. This is likely to be submitted to Science very soon. We had also this week a presentation at the USAE North American Conference on an extension of this model to compare energy efficiency options in the residential side with transportation options for households and try to see what will be the best strategy for consumers if they wanted to reduce their carbon footprint in 10, 20, or 40%. Okay, I would like to thank you all for your attention and perhaps we'll open the ground for questions. I'll leave the talk to Sergio right now.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ines. It was indeed a very interesting presentation. So I've seen a number of questions coming up. Please feel free to still enter your questions. We will still address them. I received still some questions asking whether the presentation will be available. So I repeat, the presentation will be available together with a recording and a list of the questions that we will address now. So going through the questions, I have first of all a question myself. You mentioned the national action plan on energy efficiency, Ines, and I know you'll have also the U.S. Energy Act. So what is the relation between one and the other? Is there an overlapping, or one complements the other? What is the relation?
Well, the National Action Plan on Energy Efficiency didn't have any mandatory requirements. It was more of a guideline on the importance of energy efficiency and to take that into account. So it was more of a guideline document. The Energy Security and Independence Act has a lot of things that are going to, by regulation, affect the the energy consumption in the residential sector. So among other things, they have standards for lighting, for some heating devices and boilers. There's a whole bunch of things that now will have some more stringent efficiency requirements under that act, which was very surprising to me. Yeah, that came out. So to answer your question, again, the National Action Plan is not a mandatory thing. The Energy Independence and Security Act is, so it is a federal rule.
Very good. So the National Action Plan is maybe a list of foreseeable actions that you can take towards energy efficiency improvement, but by no means mandatory.
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay, very good. So we have now another question from Juliana Netoy. She would like to know how the US laws give incentives for small projects for renewable energy or for energy savings. Do you have any considerations on this?
Yes, so Juliana, you can have a lot of information on that on the website I showed on slides. I won't go back. In one of the first slides where I was showing the energy policies all across the state spectrum. So the incentives for renewable projects and energy efficiency change from state to state. If you go to that website and link in and click in each of this, you can see state by state what are the type of incentives available. So thank you, Sergio. So for some of those, you have property bullets for all of those. Thank you, David. You can see in more detail what is going on. And this is actually the best database I know to compile everything that is going on in the US in terms of energy efficiency regulations and incentives right now.
Very good. Juliana, I believe, I hope you have your question answered. So we have a new question now from Brian. Did you consider renewable energy sources such as microgeneration, photovoltaics, and wind, and storage energy facilities in your analysis?
So, can you repeat the question, Sergio?
Yeah, so the question is on the box on the left. Brian is asking whether you considered renewable energy sources as microgenerators, photovoltaic microgenerators and wind, and if you consider also storage energy facilities.
Okay, so storage is not included. However, the renewable sources are included in the model, yes. So there are a couple of options out of those efficiency options that are coupled with wind or solar thermal. And I can provide you the list of those options too, and which types of specific end uses they are related to. So just to clarify on that point too, I built this database of energy measures based on the AEO data directly. I didn't add up any measures that weren't over there. However, I'll be very happy to have more information on the costs of such measures too, mainly on the investment costs, if any of you guys could forward that, and I'll incorporate that on the database and can even do some sort of direct assessment of those efficiencies in comparison to the rest of the stuff that is included on the AEO measures right now.
Very good. There's still another question from Mr. Kuzu. So is related to this one, I believe. So what are the effects on the US energy saving falling to the renewable energy sources? So he follows this question with another one, I think complements the question. So can the hybrid power systems can a hybrid power system source optimize the criteria for energy efficiency? So if I understand correctly, the question is asking whether the conjugation of several energy sources, renewable energy sources in this case, can serve as a major benefit for energy efficiency, together with energy efficiency, or would they have the same impact if adopted differently?
So those could be used to optimize the system together. That is not something that is included in the model right now. The model optimization criteria will be what will be the dollar per kilowatt hour or dollar per ton of CO2 avoided savings. One could try to cope savings from renewables and efficiency separately and then together and include that in the model too. So that is an interesting idea. So I perhaps should think about including that too.
Very good. So now we have a question from David Gower. So he mentions that photovoltaics was off the last chart you presented, but he considers what about solar thermal that for a lower cost can also answer some of the highest use areas. So the ones you mentioned, water heating and space heating, with even for cost comparisons, which is not in the plots. And I'll surely include that. That's a really good point. I just put the chart up a little bit.
I'm guessing, however, that the solar thermal is also in this range of 12 cents per kilowatt hour, perhaps. I might chat with David about that if he knows a little bit more on that. So it will be anyways on these ranges of prices that I show over here in the plots, right? More towards the high ends.
So now Guillermo Sobron is asking just how can we get the deliverables of these studies? So basically, when will your thesis be published?
So I'll be defending my dissertation this upcoming month, and that will be available online through both the CDMC and the SEEK sites that I presented in the first slide. I'll also provide my webpage to Sergio, and he can include it together with the presentation. Compares with transportation will be available at the USAEE website conference too. I'd be happy if you send me your contacts to also send the drafts of the papers very soon, and also drafts of my dissertation if you are interested on. For those of you that are interested on lighting specifically, I'll have also a very, very broad assessment of the transition to solid state lighting if you are interested.
Very good. So now changing the subject a little bit, Mr. Mogesh Ashagri, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, is asking what is the effect of consumer behavior on energy efficiency or in your model? How do you account for behavioral change?
Great, that is a great question. So far this model also only takes into account technological changes. So it assumes that the consumer is going to behave exactly the same way and with the same amounts of hours of operation with those new technologies that is doing with the prior ones. So to start with, the model does not account with any types of rebound effects where the consumers will use that saved money to other more energy intensive consumption. So it does not account for that. However, well, it is known also from the literature that rebound effect is generally in the order of the 10%. So it's going to be smaller than the amount of energy savings that we're able to have here. So overall, the effect is positive. On the other point that this does not take into account is that it does not compare technological changes with conservation, pure conservation changes. So some option could be always to run one appliance one less hour per week. I didn't show those results here. However, one of the things that I'll be including in my analysis is try to see what will be the same cost in time, well, not cost, what will be the time reduction needed to obtain those same savings that we're obtaining here through efficiency, by obtaining them through conservation instead. So let me be more clear on this. I wasn't clear enough. So the study will also include what will be the effort that will be needed if we remain with the same technologies to achieve the same order of savings just by reducing the usage of those technologies. That will give me an estimate of what is the value that people will give on their time of usage of those same appliances. I'll be very, very interested on knowing about studies that could cope in a better way consumer behavior and energy efficiency in those sorts of supply curve models. So if you have specific ideas, please feel free to email me and I'll certainly take those into consideration.
Very good. I can see we're having still another question. So from Dan Bitika, please explain me what is the best method or the best unit for metering the energy efficiency levels. So I assume is talking between CO2 cost and the energy cost.
Very well. So that will depend on what the objective is. If the main key is that you're wondering is to reduce carbon emissions, then dollars per ton of CO2 should be used with levelized annual costs for that. If you want to save primary energy, then dollars per BTU. And if you want to save energy, dollars per kilowatt hour. My main point by showing those different decision criteria is not that there is one that is better than the other. My main point is that you should show them all together and see the effect that ones have on the other ones. Furthermore, you shouldn't show only the dollars per kilowatt hour saved. You should also show in these types of displays what is the total amount of spending that you'll need to have in a certain year. You should also show the NPV and finally both the annual and total energy saved when you compare those things all together. So in my view, there is not one better criteria. You should show all the criteria at the same time and be aware of the different types of metrics. The dollars per ton of CO2 avoided or per ton of BTU avoided are a good and interesting metric to use on this efficiency side, just because the technologies have such different net present value and assume a 5 or 10 year range and see how those compare. Again, I do think there is no better one than the other. I think you should show all those metrics and make your decision based on that. I do think that no matter what is the criteria that is most important for policy framings, all the others should be taken into account to understand what will be the flow of implications for making one strategy over the other. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you. So I think you just answered the question from Brian asking whether this was a multi-objective problem. So indeed it is. I still have yet another question.
Right.
So you mentioned consumer discount rates and market discount rates. I didn't really understand the difference. And are these consumer discount rates something that relates to consumer behavior?
You're right, they are. So I was forgetting to mention that point. Thank you for reminding me of that. So in fact, the only behavioral aspect that we incorporated in this was exactly to make the model flexible enough that it could account for different ranges of discount rates. So like I was mentioning in the presentation, there is some literature showing that that consumers discount more heavily towards new appliances and more efficient appliances than what the market discount rates are. So for example, when choosing between keeping the same refrigerator or buying a new and more efficient one, sometimes consumers discount this decision at 300%. This means that consumers are very impatient in seeing the return of their investments in energy efficiency. One of the options in the model is to take into account specific literature for each types of end users and incorporate those discount rates. This means that, for example, lighting will have a discount rate of 20%, while refrigerators will have a discount rate of 300%, and all this with uncertainty ranges, of course. That will give us a perception on those dollar bills that are not grabs from the ground, as I was mentioning. So if you compare an efficiency supply curve with market discount rates and with those implicit discount rates, and you see the difference between the two of them, you can better understand what are the things that the consumers are not harvesting in terms of energy efficiency because of their high implicit discount rates or of their impatience as consumers. So thank you for reminding me of that, Sergio.
No problem. So I see we have time for one last question. That question just came in, and it is from Mr. Moges Ashagri. And he asks, what is the influence of residential dynamic pricing on the model? So do you take dynamic pricing into account in your model?
No, the model is at this point completely static, so it doesn't take into account any type of dynamics, and furthermore, it doesn't take into account dynamic pricing, no. It does provide the availability to run the simulations for different ranges of residential prices. So the user can either select the residential prices that the annual energy outlook forecasts, or simulate its own electricity rates, but it doesn't account for dynamic pricing right now. By definition, the efficiency supply curves are static models, and this is something that I've been struggling with too, is that in order to model the amount of energy savings under different types of scenarios over a set of years, this is definitely not the appropriate method. This is a nice method just to do a snapshot of 1 year and provide guidelines for what are the best technologies to invest in. But definitely there are other more dynamic models that will be better to simulate energy savings over time and costs over time. Well, this is not directly the dynamic pricing issue, but it's also an important point to make in here.
Very good. I think we've reached the end of our presentation today, our webinar. I would like to thank Ines for the time spent with us and for this very elusive presentation. I would like also to thank all the attendees we had. I would like to remind that the presentation, together with the recording and the list of the questions addressed here, will be available on the Leonardo Energy website. You will all receive an email with this information. Please also feel free to go to our website and check the upcoming webinars. Every week we have a new one. You're very welcome to join us for next week. So thank you very much to all of you, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye all. Thank you.